Well, Premier Daniel Andrews is standing by his Chief Health Officer as pressure mounts over his testimony to Victoria's hotel inquiry. Meanwhile, on the Queensland election campaign trail, today former Deputy Premier Jackie Trad has faced off with her opponents over the state's most hotly contested electorate, the South Brisbane seat. Here for my political analysis tonight is none other than Sky News host Peter Credlin. Thank you for joining us, Peter. Now, look, you know you're racing. In fact, you had a precocious filly that won on Derby Day or Cup Day a few years ago. You were a part owner.
Not the Derby, please.
This Palooka.
Don't sell me in. She won the maiden, the opening maiden. Yep. On Derby Day.
She won the maiden.
Yeah, she did win the maiden.
Well, that's a pretty good result. Now, this Pakula, the bloke who's running racing in Victoria, he went through all the protocols to get the Cox Plate Day up and running, all the COVID protocols, 500 owners there. And then, of course, last night, Chairman Dan found out about it. And to use a racing analogy, he was the chief steward. He put Pakula out for a month. What's the story here?
Well, you might have gelded him too, and we could say that as well. I mean, I think the issue, the big issue is it was such a tin-ear response from Pakula. And let's not forget, Pakula's the bloke that was also in charge of the quarantine hotels, at least his department was. Everyone's hiding from the decision. Quarantine hotels and private security when it was initially set up back in March. So Pakula has a long, long history of dumb decisions in Victoria. The problem with this decision, and I love the Cox Plate, I'm not having a crack at the Cox Plate or Moonee Valley, but you can't have 500 people on a racetrack when you can't have more than 10 people at a funeral in Victoria. When you've got the AFL Grand Final this weekend, the two teams in it, Geelong and Richmond, are Victorian teams, the first time in a decade. But if I was to invite my brother over to my house for a barbecue, we'd both cop a $5,000 fine, right? So you know, it's horses for courses, pardon the pun, but you've got to have rules that apply for everybody. There's got to be consistency in those rules. And it was just a really poor response from the government and all the backtracking. Look, to give Pakula some credit, he went out there and said, stuff up, shouldn't have happened, bad decision, I'll own it. But he then said, you know, when you make lots of decisions in a hurry, you're going to make mistakes. Well, this is the whole problem with March. And I've said it 100 times over. If they had, at the height of the pandemic, gone out there and said, we made such a bad call on hotel quarantine, let's get the army in, let's fix things back in June or May, I think Victorians would have forgiven them because the pace of everything at the start of the year. But it's not the mistake they made, it's the attempt to cover it up that's got Victorians so angry. And that's where they are again tonight with this Cox Plate decision.
Protest upheld. All right, what about Brett Sutton? Should he go?
Absolutely, should be gone already. Gone already. Shouldn't even be, shouldn't even been turning up to work, but he wasn't at work today, at least in the Premier's press conference. He's notable absence today. I don't think he will be there tomorrow. Let's see what happens over the weekend. But what was extraordinary, he said to the Code Inquiry that he was absolutely sure and set it on evidence that there would not be or wasn't a decision taken that he was aware of in relation to private security. But of course, you go back to these emails that have now been released by the Code Inquiry. They've been tendered in late evidence to the inquiry. He knew all about it on the very day it was decided at National Cabinet. This is Friday the 27th of March. He knew absolutely. And it's not that he just got lots of emails and he says in his evidence, you know, I got lots of emails, and he says to his instructing solicitors, do not put this one in because if I didn't read it, it doesn't need to go into evidence. Now that itself tells you something. But he did read it, and we know he read it because he replied to it. He replied to it. So he's all over this issue. And the idea that he instructs solicitors not to provide the inquiry with absolutely every email as he should, that he withheld emails, and that he withheld emails as critical as this that contradict his testimony under oath, out, gone, see you later.
Let's talk Queensland election. Of course, we had today's debate, South Brisbane, Jackie Trad up against Amy McMahon, of course, Clem Greene from the Liberal Party. It was a race to the bottom, Peter, on who could trash the coal industry more. The Greens suggesting that they will quadruple the mining royalties. That'd be about $50 billion. They can't even understand that would basically render them unviable. And of course, Jackie Trad on the record as saying before the last federal election that miners should go off and re-skill. And we, in fact, have a story that I wrote just a week ago where they've actually set up a department within Queensland bureaucracy called the Just Transition Department. 5 bureaucrats, all on $200 a year. Their sole job is to transition communities in central and north Queensland, mining communities, into renewables. Trad ran away from it at 100 miles an hour, but it just goes to show she's got a real battle on her hands between her and the Greens in South Brisbane on October 31.
I know it's almost as exciting to watch the main race on on election night as it will be the results out of Trad's seat, because if she survives and if the government is re-elected, she's a huge problem for the Premier. If she was to survive, and let's say the government doesn't survive, and I can't say that happening because I think that one would follow the other, then that would also be a problem for Labor. I mean, Trad is a warrior. She's a hard left warrior. She hates all the things that old Labor used to stand for, and she's part of that wave we've seen in Victoria and in parts of other states around the country of people that are in real conflict with the traditional Labor Party, the party of, say, the Joel Fitzgibbon and others. I mean, you keep taxing mining, eventually these big multinational mining companies will go somewhere else to dig up their resources. They won't come to Australia. And particularly at this tough time of COVID, the only way we're going to get out and start paying back this debt and get our budgets back into some sort of balance is to have a strong export industry. We know that the exporting of education, bringing students to Australia, will be constrained. We know that tourism will be constrained. Well, why shoot ourselves in the foot and make it harder, not easier, for coal and gas and uranium and everything else to be mined? I mean, this is where, you can have a socialist republic, Jackie Trad, but eventually someone's got to pay for it. Margaret Thatcher famously said, eventually socialists run out of spending someone else's money. That's the problem for Jackie Trad, and that sort of shot across the bow that, the unions will decide who sits in your cabinet, Anastasia Palaszczuk, not you. Well, it's a statement of fact. That's how the Labor Party works. But it shows that, it's a bit like that famous campaign picture. Remember when Rudd got dumped by Giller 2010 election, and they sat around the maps in Queensland. It was a stage shot, and it was clear they hated each other. Well, I feel it. Yeah, I think it's a bit of that mean girl stuff going on with Jackie Trad.
She'll be back,
I reckon.
Yeah, Peter Credlin, she will be back, make no mistake. Just quickly, Gladys Berejiklian, the New South Wales Premier, has really dug in. A lot of support over the weekend. She went out and hit the airwaves. It was on Ben Fordham's show, Kyle and Jackie O. She seems to have a fair bit of support. Do you think she'll survive?
I think she's got a lot of public support. Now, whether that support washes away in a couple of weeks' time, if there are more revelations, too early to tell. I think if you took a poll right now in New South Wales, she would be re-elected. She's popular and people regard her well. I think she's earned the cred of people for being, matter of fact and a really strong leader. She doesn't have much sizzle and pizzazz, but that's not what they're banking on in their Premier. So I think they've given her the benefit of their doubt. Why the public are with her, the colleagues are with her. But it's been, a pretty messy circumstance. If she was ever to leave, I tell you, Victorians would take her in a New York minute.
Peter Credlin, nothing wrong with winning a maiden on Derby Day.
Oh, not too shabby. I was pretty happy. Started off the day very, very well.
Well done, Peter Credlin. Good to see you tonight.
Great to be with you.